Hector mocked the dying man, stripping his armor like a common scavenger. He thought he won the war. Instead, he dressed himself in his own death shroud. Now, Achilles' scream is tearing through the sky. The golden hero of Troy is about to become a sacrifice. The reckoning begins now.
Forget marble statues. The ancient world was a grim spectacle, run by divine hunters who demanded human sacrifice and destroyed lives on a whim. We're peeling back the layers of their madness. This is Shroud of Lore.
From the night slaughter of sleeping kings and the execution of the traitor Dolon, to the carnage and the bloody chaos under the gaze of idol gods, while Hector mocked the dying Patroclus, a single cry from Achilles sent the Trojans trampling their own brother's flesh in terror, signing Hector's death warrant. But that cry had not yet been heard. First, there was the choice. Hector stood at the edge of the Greek camp as dawn broke, surveying the destruction his men had wrought. The night raid had been devastating. Diomedes and Odysseus had slipped through Trojan lines, butchered Rhesus and his Thracian allies in their sleep, and stolen the sacred horses that were supposed to guarantee Troy's victory. Now Dolon's body hung from a stake where the Greeks had left it, a warning to any Trojan foolish enough to spy on their camp. Two disasters in one night. His allies slaughtered. His spy executed. And still his army waited for orders. Polydamas appeared at his shoulder. We should withdraw behind the walls. Regroup. Wait for what? Hector's voice was sharp. More allies to be butchered. More spies to be caught. The Greeks are wounded, Polydamas. Achilles still sulks in his tent. This is our moment. The omens promised victory. Zeus himself sent an eagle over our lines yesterday. Would you have me doubt the king of gods? Polydamas fell silent, but his eyes spoke what his mouth would not. The omens had been mixed at best. Birds flying wrong directions. Sacrifices that burned with strange colors. Signs that any wise man would have read as warnings. Hector was not feeling wise. He was feeling 10 years of frustration boiling in his chest, demanding release. The Greek ships lay before him, 1,000 vessels that had carried 100,000 enemies to his shores. For a decade, those ships had been both threat and promise. Threat of endless reinforcements. Promise that if they burned, the Greeks would be trapped, forced to fight to the death or surrender. Today, they would burn. Form up the men, Hector ordered. We attack within the hour. Hector, that is my decision. He turned to face his brother. I did not ask for counsel. I gave a command. The army moved. Wave after wave of Trojans poured across the plain toward the Greek fortifications, screaming war cries that had echoed over these fields for 10 years. Hector led from the front, his spear finding Greek flesh again and again, his shield turning aside desperate counterattacks. By midday, they had breached the wall. By afternoon, they were fighting among the ships themselves. Hector felt something like joy, savage, primal, long denied. This was what victory tasted like. This was what the gods had promised him. Every Greek who fell was one step closer to ending the nightmare that had consumed his city. Then he saw the warrior in Achilles' armor. The figure moved through the battle like a thunderbolt, rallying the broken Greeks, driving back Trojans who had been on the verge of triumph. The armor was unmistakable, divine bronze, forged by Hephaestus himself, gleaming even through the dust and blood. Achilles had returned. Hector's heart seized. If Achilles was back in the fight, everything changed. The greatest warrior in the world, fresh and furious, against an army exhausted by hours of combat. But something was wrong. The warrior in divine armor fought well, but not impossibly well. His movements were skilled but human. His strength was mortal. Not Achilles. Someone wearing Achilles' armor. Hector smiled, and in that smile was 10 years of hatred. Patroclus never saw the spear coming. Hector had stalked him through the chaos, watching, waiting for the moment when the false Achilles would be vulnerable. It came when Patroclus turned to rally a group of fleeing Greeks, his back exposed for just a heartbeat. The throw was perfect. The spear took Patroclus between the shoulders, punching through armor that should have been impenetrable. The warrior stumbled, fell to his knees, and the helmet tumbled from his head, revealing the face beneath. Not Achilles. His companion. His lover, some said. His closest friend. Hector walked toward the dying man, savoring each step. Around them, the battle paused, Greeks and Trojans alike frozen by the sight of the fallen champion. Patroclus looked up at him, blood bubbling from his lips. "You think you've won something? I think I've killed a man wearing stolen armor." Hector kicked the helmet aside. "Did Achilles send you to die in his place? Did he dress you up like a sacrifice? You'll follow me soon." Patroclus's voice was fading. "Achilles will. He'll what? Weep? Tear his hair? I'm sure he will." Hector laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that carried across the battlefield. "But tears won't save you. And they won't save him when I've burned every ship and slaughtered every Greek on this beach. You're already dead." Patroclus's eyes were glazing. "You just don't know it yet." Hector grabbed the divine armor, began stripping it from the dying man. Prophecy. Threats. This is what passes for courage among Greeks. I expected better from Achilles' shadow. He didn't notice the change in the air. Didn't feel the sudden stillness that fell over the battlefield, the way both armies seemed to hold their breath. He was too focused on his triumph, too drunk on the glory of killing a hero in full view of both armies. Patroclus died with his eyes still open, his warning still hanging in the air. Hector donned the divine armor over his own, feeling its power settle around him like a second skin. Achilles' armor. Now his. Let the Greeks see their champion's greatest treasure on the body of their enemy. "Push forward," he shouted. "The ships. Burn them all." The Trojans surged with renewed fury. The Greeks fell back, step by bloody step, driven toward the water's edge. Victory was so close Hector could taste it, salt spray and smoke and the sweet promise of ending a decade of war. He fought his way toward the nearest ship, torch in hand. One flame. That was all it would take. One ship catching fire, spreading to the next, and the next, until the entire Greek fleet was an inferno. His torch touched wood. The first flames licked upward. And then the scream. It was not a human sound. The cry that tore across the battlefield came from somewhere beyond mortal lungs, a howl of grief and rage that seemed to shake the very sky. Hector spun, searching for the source, and saw him. Achilles. He stood at the edge of the fighting, unarmed, unarmored, wearing nothing but a simple tunic. But golden light blazed around him, divine fire that burned without consuming. Athena's gift, Hector realized. The goddess herself was making her champion visible to every eye on the field. Achilles screamed again, and the sound hit the Trojan lines like a physical force. Men who had been fighting with desperate courage moments ago simply broke. They threw down their weapons and ran, not caring where they went, only knowing they had to escape that terrible sound. They trampled each other in their panic, crawling over fallen comrades, crushing wounded men beneath their feet, abandoning everything in their rush to flee. Hector watched his army dissolve. Watched victory turn to disaster in the span of 3 heartbeats. "Stand," he roared. "Stand and fight." No one listened. The rout was total, unstoppable. Men who had followed him through 10 years of war were now stampeding toward Troy's walls like cattle fleeing a wolf. And through the chaos, Achilles' eyes found Hector's. There was no mercy in that gaze. No humanity. Only the cold promise of death, patient and absolute. Hector understood then. The gods had never meant for Troy to win today. The breached walls, the burning ships, Patroclus in stolen armor, all of it was bait. A lure to draw out this moment. Achilles awakened, Achilles enraged, Achilles hungry for vengeance. Zeus had promised Hector glory. The king of gods had delivered exactly that, one day of triumph, bright and brief, just enough to ensure that when the fall came, it would be spectacular. The fire he had started was already spreading, Greek sailors rushing to contain it. But it didn't matter anymore. The ships would survive. The Greeks would survive. And Hector was wearing the armor of the man who had just watched his beloved die. He had dressed himself in his own death shroud and called it victory. The retreat cost more lives than the battle. Hector ran with his men, not leading now but simply surviving, caught in the tide of bodies flowing back toward Troy. He saw warriors he had known for years crushed beneath panicked feet. Saw wounded men reaching up for help and receiving only trampling boots. This was what his victory had purchased. Not glory, slaughter. Not triumph, terror. By the time the rout slowed, the plain behind them was carpeted with Trojan dead. Not slain by Greek spears, but by their own brothers' panic. Hector stopped and turned to face the battlefield. The fires he had started were dying, Greek sailors having contained them. The ships would survive. The Greeks would survive. And tomorrow, Achilles would come for him wearing fresh armor, carrying fresh rage, hungry for the blood of the man who had mocked his beloved's death. Polydamas appeared beside him, gasping. We need to get behind the walls. Regroup. Plan what? Hector's voice was hollow. I laughed at a dying man. I stripped his armor and wore it like a trophy. I gave Achilles every reason to destroy us. You couldn't have known, I knew. Hector watched the distant figure of Achilles, still blazing with Athena's light, standing motionless at the edge of the Greek camp. Watching. Waiting. Patroclus told me with his last breath. And I laughed. The divine armor suddenly felt unbearable. Hector began tearing it off, the breastplate, the greaves, the helmet that had belonged to the greatest warrior alive. He let the pieces fall into the bloody mud. What are you doing? Polydamas grabbed his arm. I'm done wearing another man's death. Hector kicked the helmet away. I'm done pretending the gods gave me victory when they were only fattening me for slaughter. He looked toward Olympus, invisible beyond the clouds, and felt the weight of divine eyes upon him. They were still watching. Still entertained. But he would not perform for them anymore. Go back to the city, he told Polydamas. Tell the men to rest. Tomorrow we defend the walls. And you? Hector did not answer. He walked away from his army, away from the gates, toward a small rise where he could see both Troy and the Greek camp. He sat in the blood-soaked grass and watched the sun set over the battlefield. Somewhere out there, Achilles was preparing. Mourning. Planning the revenge that would come with the dawn. Hector could run. Could hide behind Troy's walls and let others face the monster he had awakened. That was what a wise man would do. But he had chosen pride over wisdom at every turn. He had laughed at prophecy and mocked the dying. He had worn stolen armor and called himself blessed by gods who only wanted to watch him burn. There would be no more running. When Achilles came, tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever the gods decreed, Hector would meet him. Not for glory. Not for Troy. Simply because it was the price of the choices he had made. The vulture gods wanted their spectacle. They would have it. But they would not have his fear. They would not have his despair. They would not have the satisfaction of seeing him grovel or beg or curse the fate he had built with his own hands. Hector sat alone on the rise as darkness fell, watching the distant glow of the Greek camp, waiting for the shadow that would soon come to claim him. He had bought one day of glory with the rest of his life. Now the bill had come due.